My name is Lester Asamoah. Currently, I work as a Foreign Service Officer for the U.S. Department of State, which is a way to say that I'm a U.S. diplomat that works in different embassies around the world. And my educational background is I got my undergraduate degree at the University of Oklahoma in International and Area Studies, and my master's degree at American University in Washington, D.C., in international development. A typical day on the job as a diplomat can be quite varied, but I'll go into work, kind of read up on things that have happened. In my case, since I live in Asia, I'll read up on things that happen in the US and what headquarters have sent to us. Then I'll go to a couple of meetings, internal, so meetings with other coworkers or people who work in the embassy, but also different outside groups. In my case, I'm an economics officer, so meeting with economists, meeting with people that work in other countries' version of the Treasury or Federal Reserve to understand what's happening with the economy in the country that I would be in. Then writing up what I learned or kind of taking action on what I've learned. And so if there's an event or some sort of VIP visit in terms of a senior U.S. government official going to the country that I'm serving in, then that would be going to meeting with them, taking notes and advising them on certain issues that we're trying to gain traction on or learn more about with the U.S. government. Great question. I actually got into the line of work from being exposed to Model UN and learning, okay, there's something outside of the United States that I could do, and diplomacy was something that I didn't really realize until I got into college, and there was somebody called Diplomat in Residence who told me, it was like a recruiter for the State Department, essentially, that said, okay, here's what diplomacy is, and here's how it works, and all these different things you can do. I always knew that I wanted to be in public service, and I knew that I wanted to be overseas, at least for some part of my job. So that's kind of, being the role I'm in now links up both of those, and been fortunate enough to be able to do that. I'd say, being able to, so I guess there's two things. The first is working in a job that's about public service. And as I mentioned, that's something that was really important to me. And I really love going to work and doing what I do and knowing that I'm doing it for the American people, right? Sometimes progress isn't fast. Sometimes we have to go through some hoops and hurdles, but it really does mean a lot to me that I'm doing something that's like for the good of the public, right? And the other thing I'd say is just getting to learn about other people and other cultures. There's so many things out there. I mean, in one lifetime, none of us can really learn everything about everyone, but giving me a chance to be out there for my job and getting to work with different people every day. In my current role, I'm in Indonesia, then I was in Mexico before, and there's something is so cool to be able to work with people from different cultures and learn from people, and get to make friends from different places. Also a great question. I'd say that the most challenging part of what I do is moving around, right? I mean, whenever you do a career that takes place outside the U.S. and being apart from your friends, your family, that can be tough. And I find that sometimes, I really wish I could just, be in Oklahoma and get all the stuff I'm used to, or being able to. I know I have colleagues that have family, they're trying to start a family, or they have kids and they're moving them around all the time. But even if you don't have the kids or a spouse to move around per se, it's still difficult to shift around and move around to different cultures and different places and the challenges that comes with it. So yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest challenge of being a diplomat, is like moving around all the time. Well, first I'd say I'm be glad that you're interested in it. We need more people from Oklahoma, from various backgrounds to do this kind of work. And I'd say, a few things come to mind in terms of being a successful diplomat in my case. Just, being open to different cultures and being willing to try new experiences and put yourself out there. And, my job, and before I started in my job, I had to kind of be comfortable with trying new things and just putting myself out there. I'd say another thing is just, learning public speaking and being willing to, talk to folks and being willing to talk to all sorts of people in all sorts of situations, being ready to put yourself out there. I'd say another skill is learning. And you don't have to necessarily do a lot of math in my job, but being able to understand numbers and being able to understand how to analyze a situation, right? When you're looking at the field of international affairs, you're talking about the politics of another country. As you can, in the United States, we have very complicated politics, and when you take that to another country, like in my case, Indonesia, you've got to be able to put together the patterns. And sometimes that looks like, what does the economy look like, and what's motivating people to do this thing that's happening because the economy is a certain way, or what's happening with this part of the country that people are worried about, like some sort of protest or some sort of human rights issue. And so being able to follow those patterns, sometimes those patterns involve numbers and charts, but just in general, those analytical skills are really key to being successful in this role and making sense of a very complicated and chaotic world. That we can do it just takes time, and just takes us taking the time to understand other cultures and understand the patterns in those cultures. For the Foreign Service, it's not required to enter to have a foreign language, but of course, many of my colleagues learned a language beforehand. As I kind of mentioned earlier, did my study abroad in Jordan, so I learned Arabic before my time. I did French in high school, so it's very helpful. And even if you don't do necessarily diplomacy itself, a lot of things that are adjacent to diplomacy, like being in defense and doing defense contracting overseas, or working in international development, working on humanitarian projects overseas, languages are pretty key. But I definitely say it's an important component of doing this job, because at the end of the day, you relate to other people and other cultures by speaking the language and understanding what's going on. So yeah, I think it's pretty important to be able to do that. Another great question. I'd say that there's a few important factors. The first being just being prepared to understand that they have a very different mindset from what we're used to in the United States. Everybody has their different ways they view the world, the way they view work, the way they view challenges, the way they view success and everyday life, and being willing to take a step back from the perspective we have as Americans to say, let me understand how life is from your perspective. That's just critical to understanding and working with people from different cultures. I'd say to that end, having a lot of patience, understanding, and just being willing to take a step back and be patient whenever you get it wrong, because you get it wrong. If we're in a different culture, we're not going to be perfect. It takes time to understand other people, and you have to have patience with yourself, and you've got to have, in the same way that we should have patience with folks who are in our case, the United States, trying to learn about what we do and being in America. The final thing I'd say is, going back to the language part, learning the language, and whether it's learning the entire language or even just learning a little bit and learning how people communicate and what's important to them in communication. You know, some cultures are very direct, right? And they're like, this is what this is. We're gonna tell you what it is. And then some cultures aren't as direct, and they want to like kind of, they find it maybe rude to be direct. And so knowing how communication works, and to that end, learning languages so then you can communicate with people in their own language whenever you can or whenever it's appropriate is, I think that's really critical to working with people from different cultures. I think effective diplomacy begins just with some of the things I just mentioned when it comes to working with different cultures. Understanding where the other side is coming from and being open to listening to them. In diplomacy, obviously you're representing the government or a side, and you have to stay true to that. But that doesn't mean you can't at least try to meet people halfway, or try to make the argument in a way that would make sense to the other party when you're negotiating or when you're trying to understand something. I'd say effective diplomacy is being just culturally open to what people, like how people live, and being outside, getting outside the bubble that our comfort zone provides us, like the bubble of that bubble, but then also just like the broader American bubble of being like, okay, what is life outside of America? Like, how do we relate to people? And I'd say being effective in diplomacy also just takes being analytical, takes being precise, takes being a great communicator, right? If you can pull together all the problems and all the different challenges, the patterns that exist, and then communicate them effectively to the people you work for and the people that you're trying to negotiate with or learn from, I think that's what makes really effective diplomacy at the end of the day. And yeah. I guess I would just add that I hope that the diplomacy is a career that people consider. I know it seems so out of touch for students, and like, how do you become a diplomat, how you do all these things, but I'm definitely here to say that it's possible, and that we really need more people with backgrounds. We're just from Oklahoma, right? I mean, there's a lot of diplomats that are from the East Coast or the West Coast, or come from families who are diplomats, or went to the big schools that produce diplomats. And but at the end of the day, as State Department leadership has said, right, and it's I personally believe, and many people believe, is we want our diplomats to represent America, right? Whether that's racial background, whether that's like geography of where you're from. Like, we can't just have everybody from the West Coast or the East Coast be diplomats. You can't have everybody from like one background or the other. We really want to have a mix of people, and I think it's really important that we have everybody consider this job, because it's so fun. You get to learn a lot, but it's also important. At the end of the day, we're representing America, and we want America to be represented in its fullest.